Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into a phrase that, well, it might sound pretty jarring at first. Alligator Alcatraz.
Yeah.
You sent us this fascinating piece, The Dark History of Alligator Alcatraz, Racial Connotations and Historical Atrocities. And our mission today is essentially to unpack this.
Right.
We want to understand its origins, what it really means, and why it still resonates, why it matters today.
Absolutely.
We're going to explore how these two, seemingly separate symbols, the alligator and Alcatraz, how they combine to paint this really disturbing picture. We're talking racial dehumanization, entrapment, systemic violence in American history.
Yeah.
So get ready for some, I think, crucial insights into how language, how imagery can reflect and, unfortunately, perpetuate some really deep societal injustices.
That's right. And what's so compelling here, I think, is that this term, it isn't just some historical footnote.
No.
It's really a powerful lens, a way to examine the huge impact of racial terror and see how these historical narratives are still shaping how we understand race and justice right now.
Yeah.
We'll be looking at where these, frankly, disturbing concepts came from and connecting them to that larger ongoing picture of racial inequality.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How deeply are these historical shadows still being cast on, contemporary discussions?
That's the key question.
Okay, so let's start by really unpacking that first part.
Yeah.
Alligator bait. Where did this phrase even come from? And what horrific reality did it represent?
Well, it emerged late 19th, early 20th centuries, and it's deeply, deeply intertwined with the Jim Crow South.
Right, the era of segregation, discrimination, violence.
Exactly. And within that context, alligator bait was just this grotesque illustration of racial dehumanization. The idea, the myth, was that Black infants could be used as objects to lure alligators.
It's almost unthinkable. And the atrocity is that some white hunters reportedly actually engaged in these despicable practices. They pushed this narrative that Black babies could literally be used as bait in swamps.
It's horrifying, and it was built entirely on this bedrock idea that Black people weren't fully human.
Right.
That perception, that awful perception, made it shockingly easy to normalize violence, exploitation.
Yeah.
It really showed the callousness of a society that just viewed Black lives as disposable.
And this wasn't just some dark, hidden thing. The media at the time actually played a role, didn't they?
Yeah.
Casually using alligator bait in newspapers.
Oh, absolutely. Casually, which just further entrenched the phrase, It used language that belittled Black individuals, promoted this incredibly racist narrative.
And it even seeped into, memorabilia.
Yeah, it found its way into memorabilia, distorting cultural items into things that celebrated or mocked oppression, which, of course, just normalized the atrocities even more.
So for you listening, this isn't just about, words on a page from long ago.
Not at all.
It really encapsulates a dark, dark chapter where racial violence and dehumanization were just rampant. And it left behind this legacy of trauma, systemic racism.
And understanding this, it's not just history. It's vital for tackling the inequalities we're still dealing with today.
Okay, we've delved into that gut-wrenching history of alligator bait. Let's pivot now to the other half of this phrase, Alcatraz.
Alcatraz.
Most people know it as the Rock, right? Famous prison. But what does it really symbolize in this specific context?
Right. So many people know it operated from, 1934 to 1963. San Francisco Bay housed guys like Al Capone.
Mm-hmm. Notorious figures.
Exactly. But what's maybe more striking is its reputation. It became infamous, truly infamous, as this inescapable fortress. You had the isolated location, the freezing water, strong currents.
Yeah.
It really embodied this idea of extreme confinement, of despair.
And the conditions inside. Equally harsh, from what I understand. Small, sterile cells.
Oh, definitely. Designed to foster hopelessness, really. Minimize human interaction, strip prisoners of dignity.
So it became more than just a prison. It was a metaphor.
A powerful metaphor for isolation, yeah. A place where rehabilitation was basically seen as irrelevant. It reflects a pretty specific, often cruel, historical way of thinking about crime and punishment, prioritizing isolation above all else.
If we connect this to the bigger picture then.
Well, Alcatraz really came to represent how society viewed those it labeled as deviant. It speaks volumes about the systemic cruelty that's often woven into the penal system itself. Its legacy kind of forces us to think about confinement as a tool for social control, and the historical atrocities tied to it, especially when you factor in racial and societal inequities.
Okay, this is where it gets really, really unsettling.
Yeah.
When you merge alligator, that symbol of danger, predation, violence without more.
Just raw, brutal violence.
And Alcatraz, the symbol of confinement, punishment, maybe even law perpetuating injustice.
Yeah.
What themes emerge when you bring those together?
It creates this incredibly haunting picture. You put the alligator, that sort of raw, unthinking violence, with Alcatraz, the ultimate symbol of despair and confinement.
It's chilling.
It really is. The combination evokes dehumanization, entrapment, and violence, particularly thinking about the historical treatment of Black children in America.
So Alligator Alcatraz becomes this metaphor then, a metaphor for systemic oppression faced by marginalized communities.
Exactly. It illustrates these brutal realities endured throughout history. It encapsulates that physical and emotional entrapment that so many Black children face.
Where their pain, their suffering just went unrecognized,
Uh,
unaddressed.
Completely. And this specific pairing of symbols, it really forces us to confront these uncomfortable histories that, let's face it, still persist.
Yeah.
And to engage critically with how these narratives keep impacting discussions about race and justice today. It's just a very sobering reminder of the deep layers of violence woven into how society perceives certain groups.
So bringing it to the present. What does all this mean for us today? How do terms, or even just the concept behind Alligator Alcatraz, contribute to ongoing issues?
Well, Alligator Alcatraz serves as this really potent focal point, I think, for examining the complexities of racial imagery and its lasting effects.
How it sticks around in our perceptions.
Precisely. It highlights how that kind of imagery feeds harmful racial stereotypes, even now. In contemporary dialogues, it works to stigmatize communities by associating them with, well, aggression, fear, criminality.
And these associations, they don't just float around, do they? They actively reinforce systemic inequalities.
Absolutely. Across the board, criminal justice, education, media representation, you name it.
It effectively creates this situation where marginalized communities feel or are metaphorically confined, like being trapped in a hostile environment.
Yes, exactly. Confined by systemic issues, with limited freedom, limited agency, very much like the Alcatraz metaphor suggests.
And this imprisonment is worsened by societal violence, which is where the alligator part comes back in.
That's the idea. The alligators symbolizing that predatory discrimination, that oppression. And think about the psychological toll.
Oh, yeah.
Feeling trapped like that. It can lead to hopelessness, despair, serious mental health issues, plus the inescapable reality of poverty, disenfranchisement, violence. It's a cycle. It perpetuates marginalization.
And it also means, I imagine, that when individuals from these communities try to navigate their identities or advocate for their rights, they often face severe backlash.
That's a huge part of it, which just reinforces that feeling of being trapped. So recognizing these complex, layered struggles is just crucial if we want to truly understand their experiences.
So let's circle back to why understanding all this historical context is so important. Why is it imperative for us to grasp the history around phrases like Alligator Alcatraz and this broader concept of racial terror?
Because this isn't just, old slang or something. It's terminology that is steeped, absolutely steeped, in a century-long legacy of racial terror and systemic oppression.
It's like a shorthand.
It functions exactly like shorthand, yeah, for a much deeper, much more troubling history that still echoes today in so many contemporary issues.
So grasping their real weight, understanding how they contributed to racial propaganda, to oppression that's essential if we want to dismantle the frameworks that still perpetuate inequality and violence.
Absolutely essential. It compels us, all of us, I think, to engage critically with language itself, to foster an awareness that's needed for those really difficult but necessary conversations about race relations and justice.
Because if we fail to acknowledge these historical connections,
we risk trivializing the profound lived experiences of people subjected to racial terror.
right.
Confronting these unsettling realities, it isn't about getting stuck in the past. It's about making sure those mistakes are neither forgotten nor repeated. It's about finding a path toward resilience and ultimately healing. Recognizing and articulating the impact of racial terror serves as this constant reminder of the ongoing struggles against systemic injustice. It's what paves the way for a more equitable future.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's just abundantly clear that Alligator Alcatraz, the concept, is so much more than just a phrase.
Much more.
It's a profound reminder, isn't it, of the historical struggles and the ongoing struggles for racial justice and equity. You've really seen how language and imagery can shape public perception, how they reflect these broader societal prejudices.
And awareness, as we've discussed, really is that first critical step towards any meaningful change.
Yeah.
It compels us to challenge the stereotypes that exist, to actively dismantle harmful ideologies, And advocacy, if it's going to be effective, has to be rooted in that understanding, amplifying voices that have historically been silenced.
Which involves what? Education,
Yeah,
community work.
all of that. Extensive education, deep community engagement, legislative efforts. It takes work on many fronts.
So the road to healing injustice, it really calls all of us to action. By staying vigilant, by committing to addressing these historical and contemporary racial narratives, we can all contribute to a more equitable future. So for you, our listener, here's a thought to maybe mull over. How might really recognizing the hidden layers of meaning, even in the everyday language we use, reshape our collective responsibility? Our responsibility to challenge injustices and actively work towards a society that truly values diversity and inclusion for everyone.